African descendant, what do you call yourself?
I call myself black.
I would identify myself as African American.
Okay.
I would identify myself as African American as well.
Call myself black.
I actually call myself black.
Call myself black.
Call myself black.
Black.
I call myself African American.
I call myself black.
I'm black.
Call myself the N-word.
African.
Black, Negro, colored, African American. Which one of these names do you identify with? Many young African Americans today face this question daily.
I actually think that the American government responded to what Africans decided to call themselves. And the term African American, which is typically used today, referring to African people from the United States or of the United States, is a term that Africans gave themselves. And so typically what happens is when you decide your identity, however you decide that, then structures and other people's respond to how you identify yourself.
I am half African of African descent, but I do call myself black. That's the other half. That's my dad's side.
I mean, I don't really have like a nationality like Jamaican or Haitian or anything like that. I'm just straight American, so black.
I was not born in Africa. I was born here. So it doesn't make sense to call myself African American. I wasn't born in Africa. While I may descend from them, I wasn't born there. So why am I calling myself African American? Because it's just a label. If you're gonna label me the right thing.
I can't just completely say I'm African because I wasn't from Africa, but I know that's where my people came from, so I have to keep that label, but at the same time, I'm Americanized. It's just simple as that.
My mother is West Indian and my dad's Puerto Rican. And individuals in today's society, they just don't get that there's variations of individuals who have color to their skin. So if you don't say black, it just confuses them.
Why I call myself the N-word is because we are not free and we are controlled by a higher power. And once you're controlled by a higher power, you know, give the rights of your freedom.
I'm not describing you when I talk about you. I'm describing me. Now here in this country we've got something called a nigger. It doesn't in such terms, I beg you to remark, exist in any other country in the world. We have invented the nigger. I didn't invent him. White people invented him.
African American media today is often causing many stereotypes and labels that is placed upon us to this day. A term that is often used in hip-hop and music videos today has created great controversy in our community. Where do you stand?
We spoke languages of the conquerors, and one of the things that they developed was what we call the N-word. Euphemistically, not to say the word at all. We use it a lot. I think typically it's, as I said, we learned English, and that was the word that was used, and so we used the word because we were speaking English for the first time. And the other thing is we continue to use it, I think, perhaps because we really don't know very much about who we are anyway.
Each of these names have brought up controversy in history. It dates back in the 1600s when Africans were described as negars, which relates today. This word comes from Latin and derives from the Spanish word negro, which means black. It is labeled to African Americans by whites, but later changed to color to seem better until the Civil Rights Movement.
I was raised in the 70s where we were still having the little problems with the whites and the black segregation and, you know, coming out of that Black Power movement. And I really didn't receive Negro and I didn't receive African Americans. I'm not from Africa. I was born in America, and I think black covers me mostly.
The disconnect is really inevitable insofar as we've been separated from the African continent for, how long should I say? Between 400 and 500 years. The reason why I say it this way is because Africans, we tend to count our time here from 1619, although there were some few Africans under the English regime who were here perhaps slightly few more years than 1619, but generally speaking, 1619 under the English. Africans were here before Columbus was here in the Americas. And we don't really tend to count our time here based on that. We tend to count our time here based on the length of time we've been under the domination of one or another group of Europeans.
African descendants have a differing opinion on what they call themselves due to our understanding of our history. Many say it's caused by a racial disconnect.
In terms of the history of African people in this U.S. of A., everybody knows, including Africans, that we come from Africa in the first place. And so that's one of the reasons why I say I'm African. But the second issue is that the names that we used, for example, a name that continues from at least the 19th century, the early 19th century, African Methodist Episcopal Church. African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. These are two different African denominations. African Baptist Church. African this, African that. African Free Society. African this, African. So when people, black people, began to describe themselves or talk about themselves or establish institutions, they identified themselves as Africans from the earliest point that we can recall.
Today, many African Americans call themselves many names, but which one of them do you relate to? Think about it. What do you call yourself?
But I want to get the language right tonight. I want to get the language so right that everybody here will cry out, yes, I'm black, I'm proud of it, I'm black and beautiful.